So imagine, if you would, taking a heavy bar of solid steel and just throwing it into a vat of liquid molten steel.
Right, it would just sink.
Exactly. It sinks straight to the bottom
Yeah.
because, that is how physics works.
Yeah, usually.
Right. When a substance turns from a liquid into a solid, its molecules pack tighter together, it becomes denser, and it sinks. But today, you are probably going to casually drop an ice cube into your drink without realizing it is doing the exact opposite.
It really is. It defies everything our basic intuition tells us about how matter should behave.
I mean,
It floats.
which is just wild when you stop to think about it. Welcome to today's deep dive. You, the listener, have handed us this massive, comprehensive encyclopedia entry on ice.
And it is so much more than just frozen water.
Oh, absolutely. Our mission today is to decode this seemingly mundane substance that you probably have in your freezer right now. We're going to reel it for what it truly is, an incredibly exotic mineral, a feat of historical engineering, and basically the absolute linchpin holding the Earth's climate system together.
Yeah, and it really is the ultimate hidden in plain sight paradox. I mean, we treat ice as just, background noise on a hot summer day.
Just a way to keep your soda cold.
Right. But if we look at the strict rules of geology, ice ticks every single box to be classified as a mineral.
Wait, an actual mineral, like officially?
Officially. It's naturally occurring, it's completely inorganic, and it has a highly ordered, rigid crystal structure. So to a geologist, dropping ice into your water glass is fundamentally no different than dropping in a chunk of quartz or like a raw diamond.
Okay, that completely shifts the perspective right out of the gate. A glass full of minerals.
Yeah, and to really grasp how this single mineral shapes the globe, we have to start exactly where you began, with that floating ice cube.
Because that quirk of physics is a big deal, right? The fact that solid water floats on liquid water.
It's huge. It is arguably the only reason life exists on Earth.
Because if it acted like the steel, lakes and oceans would freeze from the bottom up.
Exactly. They'd become solid, lifeless blocks.
Instead, the ice forms this protective crust on top, insulating the liquid water beneath. But let's get into the mechanics of that. Why does it float?
Well, the sources explain that when water freezes at standard atmospheric pressure, it becomes about 8.3% less dense than liquid water.
Right, and it expands by 9% in volume.
Yes.
And that 9% expansion,
Yes.
that is exactly why water pipes burst in your house during a winter freeze.
It is. A lot of people think the cold makes the metal brittle, but no.
No, the ice is literally acting like a slow-motion explosion from the inside.
That's a great way to put it, an explosion. And the why behind that explosion comes down to molecular geometry.
Okay, break that down for me.
Think of a water molecule like a tiny Mickey Mouse head. The big oxygen atom is the face, and the two little hydrogen atoms are the ears.
Got it. Mickey Mouse molecules.
Right. Now, the superglue holding those ears to the face is called a covalent bond. Those are incredibly strong. But there's another force at play here called hydrogen bonds. And these are more like little strips of Velcro on the outside of the molecule.
So they want to stick to the other water molecules around them.
Precisely. So superglue holds the molecule together. Velcro sticks it to its neighbors.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, when water is liquid, those molecules are just tumbling around, slipping past each other, packing together fairly tightly. But as the temperature drops toward freezing, they lose energy.
We slow down.
Exactly. And suddenly, those Velcro-like hydrogen bonds start to take over. They basically force the molecules to lock into a very rigid, highly specific hexagonal pattern.
Hexagonal, like a honeycomb.
Right. And here is the kicker. That rigid hexagonal framework actually requires more empty space between the molecules than when they were just sloshing around as a liquid.
Oh, I see. So by forcing them to stand in this strict hexagonal formation, they're basically holding each other at arm's length.
Yes, exactly.
They take up more room, the volume expands by 9%, the density drops, and boom, it floats.
You've got it perfectly, but, that's just the first bizarre physical trait. There's another invisible property hiding inside that crystal structure.
And this is the heat of fusion, right?
Yes, the heat of fusion, it dictates how ice melts. Because when you take an ice cube out of the freezer, it doesn't just smoothly and gradually warm up into water.
Wait, it doesn't?
No, not at all. The temperature of the ice will remain locked at exactly 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit while it melts.
So wait, all the heat in the room is attacking the ice cube, but its temperature isn't rising. Where's the energy going?
It's going entirely into ripping apart those Velcro-like hydrogen bonds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it takes a massive amount of thermal energy just to dismantle the hexagonal structure. And that has to happen before the resulting water can even begin to warm up by a single degree.
That is wild.
To put it in perspective, to melt a solid block of ice, it absorbed the exact same amount of energy it would take to heat that same amount of liquid water by 80 degrees Celsius.
80 degrees Celsius. That's 176 degrees Fahrenheit.
It is staggering, isn't it?
It's basically a thermal energy sponge. It's just eating up all the heat in the environment just to change its architectural shape. No wonder a single piece of ice can keep a cocktail cold for an hour.
Exactly. But speaking of how ice behaves in the real world, we should probably talk about how we move on it.
Yes, because this brings up one of the biggest scientific myths I found in the sources. The mystery of ice skating.
Ah, yes. The great pressure melting debate.
I remember this from school.
Right, for a very long time, stretching way back into the 19th century, the accepted explanation for why ice is slippery was that the incredibly thin blade of an ice skate focuses all of your body weight onto a tiny surface area.
Right. The idea was that this immense concentrated pressure literally crushed the ice, lowering its melting point right beneath the blade and creating a microscopic river of liquid water for you to glide on.
It sounds completely intuitive.
No, it really does. I definitely learned that exact theory in physics class.
Most of us did. But research back in 1939 by scientists named Bowden and Hughes actually proved it mathematically false.
Wait, 1939, we've known it was false for that long.
Yep. They showed that if pressure melting were the primary reason we can skate, you would only be able to skate down to about -4 degrees Celsius.
Which is like 25 degrees Fahrenheit.
Exactly. Below that temperature, a human being simply doesn't weigh enough to generate the pressure required to melt the ice.
Oh, interesting.
Yet, if you look at an optimal ice temperature for a professional hockey rink, it's actually much colder. It's kept around -9 degrees Celsius.
So if pressure melting was the whole story, hockey players would just be digging their blades into dry, sticky concrete.
Exactly. They wouldn't be able to move.
So if my weight isn't crushing it into water, how on earth am I gliding?
Well, Bowden and Hughes pointed to friction. The physical, high-speed rubbing of the steel blade across the ice generates enough frictional heat to create that micro layer of water.
Okay, friction. That makes sense for a hockey player flying across the rink. But wait,
What?
if I just go out onto a frozen pond in the dead of winter and stand perfectly still in my boots, the ice is still incredibly slippery. There's no friction if I'm not moving.
And that is the exact deduction that kept physicists investigating.
Huh.
More recent studies have revealed a third fascinating mechanism. The molecules at the very top surface of the ice, the ones touching the air, they don't have other water molecules above them to lock onto.
Oh, because they're at the boundary.
Right.
So
Because they can't form that perfect, rigid, geometric cage on all sides, they remain in a disordered, semi-liquid state.
just permanently.
Permanently. They essentially tumble over each other like loose marbles scattered across a hardwood floor.
Wow.
So you have pressure, you have friction, but you also have this inherent microscopic layer of rolling marbles providing permanent lubrication.
It's honestly incredible that something we've been sliding around on for centuries still requires cutting-edge physics to fully explain.
It really is.
But now that we understand the molecular weirdness of this mineral, how it forces itself to float, how it absorbs massive heat, and why it's slippery, we need to zoom out.
Because if you change the environment, water turns into things that barely even resemble ice.
Yeah, the sources outline some wild stuff. That the hexagonal ice we interact with on Earth is just one phase, right?
Correct. It's officially designated as Ice I. That's IA. But the sources outline at least 19 known crystalline phases of ice,
19.
depending on the extreme pressures and temperatures it's subjected to, plus some hypothetical ones.
When I first read about these 19 phases, I was picturing like an upgrade tree in a video game.
That's a fun way to look at it.
Like you start at Ice I, and you unlock Ice IV, and eventually you hit max level with Ice XV.
Well, it's really more about how the molecules are packed, right?
I like to think of it like packing a suitcase.
Huh?
Normally, when water freezes, it's like tossing loose wrinkled clothes into a suitcase. They take up more room.
Right, the hexagonal structure.
But if you take that suitcase and you literally sit on it, adding massive crushing pressure, you force those clothes to fold tightly and pack in entirely new, much denser ways.
That is a brilliant analogy. When you subject water to the kind of extreme pressures we don't naturally have on Earth's surface, the hydrogen bonds literally buckle. The molecules are forced into new, tightly packed geometries.
And that's how we get these different phases.
Exactly. For instance, Ice XV was discovered at extreme pressures and minus 143 degrees Celsius.
But the sources say we don't even have to stay on Earth to find weird ice. The most common type of ice in the universe isn't even a crystal at all.
No, it's not. Out in the vast freezing vacuum of outer space, water vapor will deposit directly onto interstellar dust grains. It freezes so quickly and at such incredibly low temperatures that the molecules don't even have time to organize in any kind of crystal lattice.
It's just a mess of molecules.
Pretty much. It forms low-density amorphous ice, or LDA. It's technically a glass, not a crystal.
That is fascinating. But what if we go somewhere with insane pressure? Like if we look inside the gas giants in our own solar system, Uranus and Neptune.
Oh, the suitcase gets sat on by a literal planet.
Yes. The pressures in there exceed 500,000 bars.
That's massive.
To translate that for you listening,
Yeah.
that is 500,000 times the atmospheric pressure you feel standing at sea level on Earth.
It's hard to even comprehend.
Under that kind of crushing force,
Yeah.
the sources mention something called superionic ice with a body-centered cubic structure. What does that even look like physically?
It's wild. Under that pressure, the oxygen atoms lock into a rigid cube-like cage, but the hydrogen atoms, remember the ears on our Mickey Mouse?
Yeah, the ears.
They get completely stripped off. They literally melt and flow freely through the rigid oxygen cage like a liquid metal.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's a solid block of ice that conducts electricity and behaves completely differently than anything in your freezer.
That sounds like an alien artifact. But, we don't even need to go to Neptune to see ice behave strangely. Just look at Earth's oceans.
Oh, absolutely.
When the sea freezes, it goes through these highly specific stages driven by fluid dynamics.
It does, because seawater doesn't just snap into a solid sheet all at once. It begins as tiny millimeter-scale crystals floating on the surface. These are called frizzle ice.
Frizzle.
Right. And as these crystals accumulate, they clump together and give the ocean's surface this thick, oily sheen. Mariners accurately call it grease ice.
Grease ice. I mean, it sounds like a mechanic's strip pan, not the pristine Arctic.
It really does look like an oil slick. And if the waves are active, they chop that grease ice into small circular paths with raised edges, which naturally bump into each other.
Oh, I've seen pictures of this. This is pancake ice, right?
Exactly, pancake ice.
Uh.
From there, wind and waves can sometimes roll these chunks in the surf until they are polished into perfectly spherical orbs called ice eggs.
Yeah, I saw a picture of this in the notes. It looks like a beach covered in thousands of perfectly smooth, pure white bowling balls.
Nature's tumbler.
And rivers do something just as weird. Ice discs.
Oh, those are incredible.
When an eddy, which is like a circular current in a river, catches a sheet of ice, it spins it. And the current melts the edges symmetrically until you have this massive, perfectly round, flat disc of ice just spinning in place.
Like a frozen record player.
Exactly. It's a great reminder that ice isn't static. It is a mineral constantly being sculpted by temperature, pressure, and fluid dynamics.
Which really brings us to a fascinating turning point in this deep dive.
Yeah, because humanity didn't just sit on the shoreline admiring spinning ice discs.
No, we definitely didn't.
Once we realized the immense thermal and physical power of this mineral, we decided to engineer it. We weaponized it, we used it as structural foundations, and we monetized it.
The ingenuity is remarkable, especially when you look back to antiquity. Around 400 BC, Persian engineers constructed massive underground refrigerators.
In the middle of the desert.
Yes, in the desert. They were called yakchals, and they were designed to keep ice frozen right through the scorching summer.
Okay, storing ice in a desert summer in 400 BC. Unless they had some magical ancient air conditioning, they must have figured out a way to completely block out the sun and trap the cold.
Some kind of extreme insulation.
Yeah, exactly. How did they do it?
Well, they would harvest ice from surrounding mountains during the winter and transport it to these domed subterranean vaults. And these vaults were massive, up to 5,000 cubic meters.
Wow.
The base walls were 2 meters thick, but the real engineering marvel was the mortar they used, a material called sarouge.
Sarouge.
Right. It was a precise mixture of sand, clay, lime, ash, egg whites, and goat hair.
Egg whites and goat hair.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it sounds like they were brewing a potion. Why would that work?
It's actually brilliant chemistry and material science. The egg whites acted as a hydrophobic or water repellent binder. They made the mortar completely impenetrable to moisture. And the goat hair provided tensile strength, acting exactly the way fiberglass reinforcement works in modern construction.
That is incredible.
It prevented the thick clay walls from cracking in the extreme desert heat. Combine that impenetrable shell with wind catchers that channeled cold nighttime breezes down into the vault, and the internal temperature stayed below freezing all year round.
That is just brilliant. They engineered desert ice cream thousands of years before electricity.
Basically, yeah.
But let's jump forward to the 19th century, because this is where humanity transitions from storing local ice to commodifying it globally. This introduces us to Frederick Tudor.
Ah, the self-declared Ice King.
Yes, the Ice King. He launched the global ice trade.
His vision was to carve massive blocks of ice out of the frozen lakes of New England during the winter and ship them on boats down to the Caribbean and eventually all the way to India.
But how do you put a block of ice on a wooden sailing ship, send it to the tropics for weeks, and not just end up delivering a ship full of lukewarm water?
Well, Tudor realized that the ambient temperature wasn't his main enemy. The transfer of heat was.
Okay.
He needed a cheap, abundant insulator. So he started packing the ice blocks in massive amounts of sawdust. Yeah, the sawdust trapped thousands of tiny pockets of air, which acts as a fantastic thermal barrier, completely disrupting the heat transfer from the tropical air to the ice.
And it worked.
It was so effective that he successfully shipped winter weather across the globe.
He practically invented the modern cold chain.
He really did.
But we also learned to use ice not just for its thermal properties, but for its sheer physical strength. Which brings us to World War II.
The Siege of Leningrad.
Right. During the brutal siege of Leningrad, the German army had the city entirely cut off by land. The only potential escape or supply route was across Lake Ladoga.
And when winter arrived and the lake froze, the Soviets established what became known as the Road of Life. They literally drove supply convoys right over the frozen surface of the lake.
But driving a military truck over ice, that requires a terrifying level of precision?
It was a lethal tightrope walk. The physicists had to calculate exactly how much ice was needed. To support a single truck weighing 9 tons, they determined the ice had to be a minimum of 51 centimeters thick.
And the sources noted they had a remarkably strict speed limit of 25 kilometers per hour, which is wild to me because if I'm driving a supply truck over black ice while actively being shelled by artillery, my instinct is to floor it. Why the speed limit?
It wasn't about the tires slipping, it was about underwater wave dynamics.
Wave dynamics.
Yes. As a heavy truck rolls over a sheet of ice, its weight presses down, displacing the liquid water directly beneath it. This creates a wave that rolls forward under the ice.
Oh, man.
If a truck drives too fast, it risks outpacing or synchronizing with its own underwater wave. And if that happens, the wave's energy builds up and violently pushes upward, shattering the ice right in front of the truck.
And sending the vehicle straight to the bottom of the lake.
Exactly.
So you're literally running from an invisible wave of your own creation beneath the ice.
Yeah.
That is absolutely terrifying.
It really is.
But it brings up a logical transition. If ice has the tensile strength to support a 9-ton truck rolling over a deep lake, it begs a crazy engineering question. Could you build an entire military fortress out of it?
Which leads us to one of the most bizarre footnotes in military history, Project Habakkuk.
I couldn't believe this when I read it.
It was an actual funded Allied plan during World War II to build a massive aircraft carrier out of ice.
An aircraft carrier made of ice. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, I have to push back on this one. Ice shatters when you hit it, and it melts when the sun comes out.
Well, the Allied engineers knew pure ice wouldn't work, so they created a composite material called pykrete.
Pykrete?
Yeah, which was a mixture of water and wood pulp-like sawdust frozen together.
Going back to the sawdust.
Exactly. The wood pulp solved the shattering problem. It added immense tensile strength, making the pykrete as tough as concrete and virtually immune to torpedo strikes. A torpedo would just dent it. Furthermore, it melted incredibly slowly compared to pure ice.
Okay, so it's a floating, torpedo-proof glacier. Why didn't they build an entire fleet of them?
Reality caught up with the theory. They built a prototype in Canada, but the logistics were a nightmare. Even though pykrete melts slowly, it still melts.
Right.
To keep a vessel the size of an aircraft carrier structurally sound in the open ocean, it required massive, heavy refrigeration plants built directly into the hull. It ended up being more expensive than a steel carrier, it was absurdly slow to maneuver, and the project was quietly scrapped.
So we couldn't build our pykrete superweapon. But the sheer fact that we tried, the fact that we spent thousands of years mastering this mineral to keep us fed, supplied, and alive, it brings us to the final and most crucial segment of this deep dive.
The climate.
Yes, humanity's mastery of ice directly fueled our industrial era. And that very industrial era is now rapidly destroying the global cryosphere.
The word rapidly almost feels like an understatement when you look at the data in these sources. Between 1994 and 2017, the Earth lost 28 trillion tons of ice.
28 trillion.
And the rate of loss has accelerated by 57% since the 1990s. The greenhouse gas emissions from our industrial development are trapping heat, and the global map is quite literally being rewritten in real time.
28 trillion tons is a number so vast it practically loses all meaning. But we need to ground this in human reality, because when people hear melting ice, they usually picture polar bears on shrinking glaciers.
Right. Which is sad, but it's not the whole picture.
No, the impact is far more immediate to human survival. The sources highlight something called the Asian water towers.
Yes. The Hindu Kush Himalayan region contains such a vast concentration of glaciers that it's frequently referred to as the Earth's third pole.
Wow.
Those glaciers are the Asian water towers because their slow seasonal meltwater acts as a massive reservoir. It feeds into river systems that support agriculture, sanitation, and drinking water for an estimated 2 billion people.
2 billion people. If those glaciers vanish, it's not an environmental sad story. It is a catastrophic agricultural and humanitarian crisis for a quarter of the global population.
Exactly.
And the terrifying part is that losing this ice creates a cascading effect through something called the albedo effect.
The feedback loop.
Right. I like to visualize it like this. Imagine you're standing outside in the blazing sun on a 100-degree summer day wearing a crisp white t-shirt. The white fabric reflects the solar energy away. You stay relatively cool.
Right.
But if you suddenly take off that white shirt and put on a dark black t-shirt, the fabric absorbs all that heat. You immediately start sweating.
That is exactly what is happening to the planet. The vast sheets of white sea ice in the Arctic act as the Earth's white t-shirt. They reflect a huge amount of solar radiation right back into space.
But as it melts,
As that ice melts, it exposes the dark, deep ocean water beneath. The Earth changes into a black t-shirt. The ocean absorbs that solar heat. The water warms up, which in turn melts even more ice, exposing even more dark water.
it is an accelerating vicious cycle, the ice albedo feedback loop.
And it doesn't stop at just warming the water. The sheer volume of fresh water pouring off these melting glaciers is threatening to short-circuit the ocean's circulatory system.
You mean the currents.
Right. We are looking at critical tipping points. Take the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or the AMOC.
AMOC.
Right. This is a permafrost is soil, rock, and organic material that has remained continuously frozen for at least 2 consecutive years, though much of it has been frozen for millennia.
Right.
Millions of people live and work on infrastructure built on top of it. As the ice binding this permafrost together melts, the ground liquefies. It subsides.
It just sinks.
Roads tear apart, pipelines buckle, and entire buildings collapse into the mud. By 2050, the economic damage from thawing permafrost infrastructure alone is projected to cost tens of billions of dollars.
Which brings us to the ultimate existential metric of the Great Melt, sea level rise.
The big one.
If all the ice currently locked up on Earth were to melt, the sources state that global sea levels would rise by roughly 70 meters. That is over 229 feet.
It's hard to picture.
Just to paint a picture in your mind, a 70-meter rise puts the ocean surface above the torch of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor.
Wow.
Entire nations, coastal cities, and historical landmarks would simply cease to exist above water. And the lion's share of that water is sitting in one place.
Over 53 meters of that potential rise, so the vast majority of it, is locked away in the East Antarctic ice sheet.
Just sitting there.
Now, for the sake of accuracy, the complete melting of East Antarctica would require extreme warming sustained over thousands of years. But the West Antarctic ice sheet and the Greenland ice sheet are highly vulnerable right now.
It's already starting.
The loss of ice isn't some distant hypothetical thought experiment. It is an active, accelerating crisis happening today.
So let's take a breath and look back at the incredible journey we've taken today. We started by looking at a completely mundane floating ice cube in a glass and unpacked the bizarre molecular Velcro that forces it to expand.
The Mickey Mouse molecules.
Right. We explored a multiverse of ice, from the supersonic cubic structures inside Neptune to spinning ice disks in frozen rivers. We walked through the ingenious goat hair vaults of ancient Persia and rode shotgun over the terrifying wave-riding ice roads of World War II.
We really covered some ground.
And we confronted the sobering reality that this exotic mineral, which basically holds our climate together, is rapidly slipping through our fingers.
It is a profound realization. We think of Earth as a rock, but it's really an ice world hanging in a delicate balance. And, there is one final mind-bending concept from the sources that perfectly captures the sheer, almost incomprehensible physical scale of the ice we've been talking about.
Whoa, what is this?
It's a geological process called isostatic rebound.
Isostatic rebound. I actually didn't see that in my notes. What exactly is rebounding?
The continents themselves.
Oh, wait.
We talked about how if all the ice melted, the oceans would rise by 70 meters, but the Earth's crust is not a rigid, static shell. It is slightly elastic.
Okay.
Right now, as we speak, the massive land masses of Greenland and Antarctica are being physically crushed downward into the Earth's hot mantle by the unimaginably heavy weight of billions upon billions of tons of ice.
They're literally being suppressed by the weight.
Yes. If all of that ice were to melt and flow into the oceans, that staggering burden would be removed. And the continental bedrock, finally freed from the weight, would literally bounce back up.
Wait, the bedrock of the continent would just spring upward into the air.
I mean, it would happen slowly in geologic time, but the sheer scale is staggering. On average, the entire landmass of Greenland would rise by 301 meters.
300 meters.
And Antarctica would rebound by an average of 494 meters. In the very center of the Antarctic continent, the land would thrust upward toward the sky by nearly a full kilometer.
A full kilometer. I want you to just hold that image in your mind as we sign off. We worry, rightfully so, about the oceans rising up to swallow the coasts. But imagine a future world where the sea rises by 70 meters, but the continents themselves physically spring out of the ocean, stretching hundreds of meters up into the sky, simply because the ice is finally gone.
It's a surreal thought.
It is the ultimate reminder that that little, mundane, floating ice cube in your freezer is not just frozen water, it's a mineral. It's a marvel. And collectively, it is a physical force so heavy, so powerful, that it is literally holding down the surface of the Earth.